This is a story about a client of mine who would land great jobs at startups specifically, but would end up exiting quickly. And the reason is because the strengths that landed him the job eventually started to work against him the longer he stayed. So when we first started working together, he was at a startup. It was early stage and a small team with Series A funding. It was exactly the kind of environment where someone like him would thrive. So he brought vision to the company as well as a tactical plan for the technology. He had a way of seeing around corners for what would come next before the rest of them did. And it was valuable. They hired him because of that. And for a while, it worked beautifully. Then the company raised a second round of funding, and testing their product had been successful. At this point, new leadership came in. The organization started to formalize its processes, reporting structures, a more rigorous operational framework. And that's where his leadership potential became invisible. The new leadership brought its own team in, and he became redundant and frustrated. He didn't understand why this kept happening. He wanted very badly to be able to transition with the startup and continue working there. But a pattern was developing. This was the third time he had been transitioned out of a startup in phase 2. We worked together through that transition. And then he found another startup. And he knew exactly why he was there. Vision, again, expertise, the ability to see the path forward. But this time the problem was different. His new boss was someone he genuinely liked and respected. The product, however, wasn't landing with audiences. Direction from above became unclear. Priorities shifted. The environment that had felt promising started to dissolve in front of him. And this was another opportunity for him to pivot and take charge, to redefine his strengths into leadership skills, but mostly to be decisive. And he got lost. He just drifted without clear direction, or without a defined scope, or without the framework he needed to actually land anywhere. He became like an untethered boat. He was capable of really brilliant thinking, but going nowhere in particular. That's what we're talking about today, not just what your strengths are, but what your strengths need in order to become superpowers. And what happens when you face changing conditions on the horizon. Can you adapt and keep moving forward? I'm Christina Holloway. For over 25 years, I've coached senior leaders at organizations like Google, GE, and Spotify to architect their authority and navigate the high-stakes politics of the Fortune 500. On this channel, I show you how to recognize the power plays hiding in plain sight and how to communicate with the presence that demands a seat at the table. This is the third video in July's Self-Aware Leader series. So far this month, we've talked about seeing your behaviors and habits on a spectrum so you can dial them up or down depending on the situation. And last week, we talked about what happens when your behavior patterns meet someone else's and what that reaction is actually telling you about the situation you're facing. Today, we go to the next level. We're going to talk about what happens when you only rely on your biggest strengths without developing or layering your secondary strengths, or even conditioning those areas you know you need to improve. The question isn't about staying in an environment that only serves your strengths, but what do your strengths actually need in order to work? And are you in an environment that provides it? All right, so let's get started. I'm going to reference Hogan again for this video. And while it's the coach who interprets the results, it's also important to understand where Hogan indicates exactly what the results should surface for us to discuss. The Hogan Development Survey identifies behavioral tendencies that emerge when a person is stressed, bored, or fatigued. Behaviors associated with elevated scores can be strengths, but when overused, they can derail relationships and careers. And then this line, which I think is the most important thing the Hogan says about itself. Low scores indicate underused strengths that also deserve attention. It's not low scores are safe, and it's not low scores are neutral. Pay attention here. Underused strengths that deserve attention. That's important. Most people look at the Hogan and do the same thing. They scan for the high scores or see a whole bunch of red and think they're a hot mess. Those are the danger zones. Those are the red flags, or those are the behaviors I need to manage and mitigate, which is what I did too when I saw my scores. And these extremely low scores, relief. Nothing to worry about here. But that's not the whole picture. So here's how I think about it. Your Hogan scores don't tell you who you are today in this moment. They tell you what you're like under pressure over the course of your professional adult life. They tell you what behaviors emerge when the work gets hard, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when things become unmanageable. The high scores show you where you have the most energy and therefore the most potential for both impact and overuse. The low scores show you where the energy simply isn't present, which means in the moments that require that particular behavior, you may have very little to draw from. And many times clients will tell me, I'm not so sure I act that way. And that's a very real and valid response. You may have finally found the environment that's best suited for your strengths, and those red scores are really acting like superpowers for you. And you get to ask yourself a really important question. What does this score tell me about the conditions where I perform at my best? And am I in that environment right now? And here's something else about Hogan. There are 3 reports. And I've been focusing on the behaviors report because it's rich with information while we navigate conflict. But combined with the other 2, Hogan really is telling us how we manage risk. There is an enormous thread that connects these reports from the environment you prefer to the person you are, your personality, to the behaviors you use to succeed. And it all comes down to how we manage risk. What is our relationship to risk? And our behaviors show us that. They show us how we might play big with a high score or shrink away with a low score. That's it. That's what we can ask ourselves every day at work. Where am I managing risk, and where is risk managing me? My client, the one from the beginning of this video, had a very specific relationship with that risk. He didn't freeze and he didn't retreat. He took action every time because he thought his innovative brain could handle it. Yes, sure, he was right, but he also needed structure that only a strong boss or a strong team could give him. When that changed or dissolved, he started spinning and couldn't find his way forward. And that brings us to his actual scores. Let me show you what his profile actually looks like. On the Hogan Development Survey, he scored 99 on the Imaginative scale, and he scored 2 on the Diligent scale. Let's take those one at a time. The Imaginative scale concerns seeming innovative, creative, possibly eccentric, and sometimes self-absorbed. Hogan describes someone with a very high imaginative score as someone who offers creative solutions to problems even when nobody asks for one. Someone who has many ideas about how to do things better. Someone who communicates in complicated and sometimes abstract ways, gets lost in their own thoughts, and can seem completely unaware of how their ideas might impact the people around them. At 99, he uses his imaginative strength more than 99% of the professional population. That's not hyperbole, that's the percentile. And you can already see both sides of that score in the description. The creative solutions, the many ideas, the ability to see things others simply don't see. Those are superpower expressions. Yeah. And then communicates in a complicated and abstract way, gets lost in his own thoughts, unaware of how his ideas land. Those are the derailment expressions. That's the same person with 2 completely different outcomes depending on what the work environment does with what he brings. Now, the Diligent scale. Hogan describes diligent as being hardworking, detail-oriented, and holding high standards of performance for yourself and others. We talked about this scale in the first July video. At a high score, it produces micromanaging perfectionism, but at a low score, Hogan tells us something different entirely. At 2, he tends not to pay close attention to details. He has a relaxed attitude toward rules and procedures. He misses deadlines. He doesn't plan his work carefully in advance, and he can seem somewhat disorganized. He possibly thinks that too much organization interferes with his creative process. Now let's look at that list again, but this time alongside that high imaginative at 99. Someone who is generating ideas constantly, thinking in the abstract, seeing around corners, communicating complex visions. That person does not need to be meticulous about details. In fact, if they were, it might actually interfere. The high diligent brain asks, is this right? Is this precise? Is every element accounted for? The high imaginative brain asks, what if we did it completely different? What if the whole premise is wrong? What if there's a better question underneath this one? Those two modes of thinking don't naturally coexist in the same person. And in his case, they don't. He's almost entirely in the imaginative mode and almost entirely out of the diligent mode. Here's what I want you to notice. His low diligent score is not a separate problem from his high imaginative score. They are two expressions of the same underlying behavior pattern. The same orientation that produces the creative thinking also produces the organizational looseness. You cannot surgically remove the diligent limitation without also removing something essential from the imaginative strength. They come as a package. This is what the Hogan means when it says low scores indicate underused strengths that deserve attention. His low diligent is not a character flaw. It's the shadow side of his most powerful capability. And understanding that, really understanding it, changes what we understand about our strengths. We stopped trying to make him more organized. That was never going to work, and it wasn't the right goal. What we worked on instead was understanding the specific conditions where his imaginative superpower could perform at its highest level and what structures, relationships, and environments he needed around him to compensate for what the low diligent left open. Meaning he needed the right environment. And he thought he found it by gravitating towards innovative startups. A high imaginative, low diligent leader is an extraordinary engine. The creativity is genuine. The ability to see a path that no one else can see, that is a rare and valuable thing. But without a navigation system or a compass or someone at the helm who knows where to direct his energy for the best possible outcome, that engine can generate tremendous momentum in completely the wrong direction. This is important too. In the first startup where he worked, the founding team appreciated his creativity because it helped them chart a path. The early stage chaos was actually his natural environment. It was undefined and fast moving. He was built for that, and he delivered. When the second leadership team arrived, it was operationally rigorous, metrics driven, looking for structured reporting and measurable outcomes. They were speaking a language that simply didn't come naturally to him. He was not a strategic thinker, and the second team didn't have time to set him up for success. In his second startup, the problem was different, but the route was the same. His boss was giving him direction. When the product stopped landing and the company's direction became unclear, his boss lost the ability to provide that structure. And without it, he drifted. He actually stayed there for quite a while with nothing to do, but uninterested in taking a more visible leadership position. Now, this is important. His scores are not the problem. He didn't need to become someone different, but every superpower has conditions. Every strength has an environment where it performs and an environment where it derails. And the most important thing you can know about yourself as a leader, as a professional, as a person trying to do meaningful work is not just what you're capable of. It's what your capability needs in order to actually succeed. He eventually found that environment again, a well-funded startup where the founding team provided the direction, the operational structure, and the clear imperative, and where his job was simply to be the most creative person directed towards that strategic goal, which he was. Completely and without question. So, how do you apply this to yourself? And you might think, Well, sure, Christina, I can see where I may have high scores, but I don't know how to spot the low scores. Extremely low scores are not very common, but you can still reflect on those job responsibilities that you don't like to do. So that's a very good start. And I don't mean I don't like to give presentations. I mean, I don't want to lead this project. I don't want to review these documents. I don't want to pore over this data yet again. Anywhere where you say, this seems like a waste of my time or talents, it's that low tolerance where you shrink away. Here are 3 coaching questions to help you through that self-reflection. Question number 1, what does my strongest pattern actually produce when conditions are right? This is the superpower question. What does it look like when everything aligns, when you're in the right environment, working on the right problem with the right people around you? My client's Imaginative at 99 in the right startup produced something genuinely rare, a way of solving problems that consistently surprised people who thought they already knew the answer, a creative energy that made the organization move faster and think bigger than it would have without him. That's the superpower expressed at full capacity. So start there. What does your strongest pattern actually produce when the conditions are right? Write it down. Be specific, not I'm creative or I'm a strong leader. What specific outcomes does your pattern generate in the environments where it performs best? Question number 2, what environment does my superpower need to perform? This is the container question. My client's superpower needed 3 things: clear direction from above, a defined scope, and operational support around him. When all 3 were present, he was exceptional. When any of them disappeared, the superpower started to drift. What does your superpower need? Think about the moments when you have performed at your absolute best. You know, when the work felt almost effortless, when the results surprised even you, when you looked up and thought, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. What was true about that environment? What was your relationship with your boss? What kind of problem were you solving? What was the structure around you? The answers to those questions tell you what to look for in a role, what to ask for in a relationship, and what to build around yourself to succeed when the conditions aren't naturally present. Question number 3, what is my lowest score leaving me without? And when does that absence cost me most? This is the underused strength question. Consider what your lowest scores could be. Where do you shrink away? I don't challenge the status quo. I don't have structure around my talents or deliverables. In what professional situations does that absence leave you exposed? A low score is telling you something. In the moments where that behavior would serve you most, you may have very little to draw from. Like I said, that's worth building around. And in some cases, that's worth developing. Having a very low derailer doesn't mean you don't need to worry about it. It means the more you grow into your career, the more you'll need to develop a stronger relationship with that underdeveloped habit, a weakness, if you will. But I try to stay away from calling it that. Definitely a development opportunity, but a very good one, a good problem to have. I would say working on a behavior that's underdeveloped is going to be a more positive experience than finding awareness around a behavior that's been working against you because you didn't realize you were overusing it. Here's what I want you to take from this video. My client with the Imaginative 99 and the Diligent 2 was never the problem. He was never broken. He was never someone who needed to be fixed or fundamentally changed. He was someone who needed to understand what his unique profile was built for. And once he understood that, he could stop ending up in environments that made him invisible and start building toward the ones that made him exceptional. That's the work. That's always been the work. Next week, we close out July with a question I've been saving all month. What happens when a high performer disappears? That's the second half of this video. We're going to look at what very low scores across multiple scales are actually telling you, and why the people most likely to vanish when things get hard are often the ones with the strongest performance records when things are easy. How about that? And if today resonated, if you recognized yourself in my client's story, or if you've been in an environment that made your strongest capability invisible, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what your superpower needs that your current environment isn't providing, because naming it is always the first step toward understanding it. My free communication toolkit is linked in the description below, and if you're ready to see your own behavioral patterns, the Hogan Leadership Blueprint is linked there as well. It starts with a 20-minute discovery call. I'm Christina Holloway. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.